Hi, everybody. It's Meteorologist Joe Cioffi at the lunchtime hour as we take a look at Hurricane Irma. Been straddling the north coast of Cuba all night. It came inland. It came onto those barrier islands last night as a Category 5 hurricane with top winds of 160 miles an hour, and it is been straddling those islands. If you go back to last night when it came inland, when I did the live stream, I just as the eye moved over those islands, it was really incredible to see the eye literally bounce like a ball over each island. And it has just really been astounding to me to watch that eye just straddle that north coast. Now, if you look carefully on the satellite loop, you're going to see that a couple of things that have happened. And we're going to look at all the radars on this in just a second. By the way, I am live, so I'm not going to be able to chat with you guys at the same time, but we're definitely going to come back and do it a little bit later on once we get through all this, and we've got a lot to talk about here. So the eye, of course, naturally, with the interaction of Irma and the island of Cuba, which has a rough terrain to a large degree, is having an impact on the structure. It still has a very well-defined core, and this could be a big deal once it finishes its trip along these barrier islands and begins to emerge into the open waters of the Florida Straits. And that's going to happen very soon, by the way. And I would not be at all surprised if this thing winds up strengthening very rapidly once it does that. The conditions aloft have not changed. They're still about as favorable for strengthening as you can get, and you've got water temperatures in the Florida Straits that are sitting around the 90-degree mark because of the shallowness of the water. This thing's I think is going to strengthen again. It remains to be seen how strong it can get, but if it emerges over the water in the later this afternoon or by early evening, it's going to have all night and probably the first part of tomorrow before it makes its landfall in Florida. Now, a couple of things I want to watch out for in this. Because of the weakening, the vertical structure of the hurricane it perhaps is a little less defined, not by a lot, but a little. I'm just wondering off the top of my head whether that might allow this to respond to some of the lower level steering, which could make that northerly turn just a little bit sooner. So, I want to watch out for that. It might make a difference in the landfall by 20 or 30 miles. I don't think it would make much more of a difference than that, but it would be critical for the cities along the coast of Southwest Florida, Fort Myers versus Naples, for example, or that kind of a correction in the distance. So I'm just going to be watching out for that possibility. But in terms of the look of the hurricane, it's still very impressive. This was not an unexpected development in terms of moving on land. We certainly were anticipating this possibility occurring. And indeed, that was the case. Now, we're going to move around. I'm going to start looking at the radars here. So we are beginning to come into range now of radars, particularly the Key West radar. And you can see the bands, the outer bands of the hurricane out in the Florida Straits and also over the Keys, getting some bands into Southwest Florida, even getting some rain now into Miami. And they're swinging back westward and then southward as they rotate around. And by the way, just at the very edge of the screen of the radar view here in the southeast corner, you can see the beginnings of the core of the hurricane starting to emerge northwestward into view of this particular radar range. I'll jump over to the Miami radar now, and you can see it from this perspective. There's those bands that are up into South Florida. Looks like some very heavy rains just swung through the Everglades. And you can see the geography here: Everglades City, Naples, Fort Myers, Then you've gone northward towards Sarasota. So, you know, the landfall is going to be somewhere in here, I think. Sarasota, Fort Myers, Naples, Everglades, Key. And if the vertical structure of the hurricane was impacted enough where we start to see this thing start responding to the lower level steering, which turns a bit sooner than the higher levels by a few hours, again, it could make a 20 or 30 mile difference for somebody. So we're going to be watching for that possibility very closely. This is the view from the Tampa Bay radar, and you actually have some showers and squalls coming in near up around Melbourne. That really just kind of is in the northern periphery of the circulation of this, and it's not really part of those the bands that are spiraling around the core. But you know, we're going to watch these bands as they come in, so they'll give us at least an additional clue as to what's happening with regards to the structure of the storm itself. I want to go to that inundation tool that's on the National Weather Service website, the National Hurricane Center's website, and take a look at what the latest forecast is, assuming that it loads, because you know we are at a busy time here, so I'm hoping that this thing loads up. It seems to be a little bit on the slow side, and you know, we may have to come back to this. But this tool is available for those of you who need it. You'll be able to tell you how much actual flooding will occur in your area. It's at nhc.noaa.gov. Look where all the Irma information is near the top of the page, and you'll see a link there for inundation tool. And as I said, apparently there must be a lot of people in this right now, because I'm not getting any particular response with regards to this. Here's the reconnaissance aircraft report from last night, and you can see how the pressures rose just before landfall. They fell right before landfall, and then they started to come up a bit. 925, 926, 924, 931 millibars. I'm going to update this now and put out in some of the, see if there's a later recon to see where we are at the moment. Definitely has weakened down to a Category 3. There's no question of that. Still with winds of 125 miles an hour. All right, so we do have the last recon fixes from about an hour and a half ago, so I can update this with that. So just let me load it up into the viewer here for you, and we can watch the progress as the storm moved along the Florida coast. So you can see that the pressure has continued to rise, which again is understandable. We're not seeing any of the winds here above 113 knots, at least according to the wind barbs, but we don't know specifically. I don't know what the anemometers here are reporting, if they're still standing, but 935, 937, 940, 941. So in those four fixes, those four passes, the pressure has risen about 6 millibars. Now notice we're going to start to get close to where Cuba bends more westward, and we'll see as the eye of the hurricane starts to gain some clearance away from the Florida coast as we move through the late afternoon and evening hours, and then we'll start to get a real feel for whether how much re-strengthening is going to occur once it gets into that open waterway that's in the Florida Straits. The water temperatures there, as I said, they're up around 90 degrees. They're as warm as you can get, and certainly enough juice to support this to go back to a Category 5 hurricane. It's not impossible. It's going to be a bit of a tough sell, depending on how much how much of the core still is there and still is intact. These are the latest model plots from the Hurricane Center for Hurricane Irma, and you can see they bring it inland. The plots last night adjusted ever so slightly to the left, but they're very tightly clustered with just a couple of outliers to the east. But right along and up the coast, hitting all the major cities on the west coast, up from Fort Myers Sarasota, Tampa Bay, and then northwestward from there. That's going to swing the most of the heavy rains north and west, as we've been saying, as far as any of that coming up here into the northeast in terms of the rains later next week. If we do get some of it, I don't expect any kind of serious impact at all. You wouldn't even know it was from a tropical storm unless I would have told you about it. So it just won't stand out as anything that you would have to worry about. So let's reload our maps from Tropical Tidbits, and we're going to we're going to try and look at the recent models. Let me give me a little shot here as we give the browser a bit of a refresh, and we'll get this going for you here. All right, great. So I'm going to make this a little bigger so that I know it's working for you, so I can not strain my eyes too much on the interactive tool. So let's get you the latest one, and we'll put up a region that is reasonably close. And I think I'm going to start with the winds at the higher levels of the atmosphere to show you again where this turn is going to take place. And again, you've got high pressure on either side at the high levels of the atmosphere with Irma sandwiched in between, and those westerly winds in the upper atmosphere are really not that far away. And the area in white that you see up in Missouri and Illinois, that is the next trough that's digging southward that is going to bend that jet stream into a southerly flow over the next 24 hours. And as we watch the hurricane straddle that north coast, now it starts to emerge into the Florida Straits here. This is timed for 10 o'clock tonight. And you see how the lines with the arrows showing the upper level winds along in the eastern Gulf of Mexico begin to bend and start to become more southerly. This is the opening that Irma responds to. And the NAM today, not that I necessarily literally believe it, but again, if the core of the hurricane was impacted, where it being a little bit weaker allows it to respond to steering at lower levels faster, it may make the turn a bit more sharply, and perhaps favor the southern end of the envelope of those forecast tracks. And you see that the NAM kind of does that. It brings it in. It's gone back to being, a little bit further to the south, and goes up inland and then up the spine of Florida into southern Georgia by 11 a.m. Monday. You just follow that L. It's the L that's over Florida is the representation of the hurricane on this upper level map. But you see how that trough drops southward. And that upper trough in the middle Mississippi, the Mississippi Valley into the north central Gulf is so far west that it just literally captures Irma and takes it northwest. Usually these things wind up getting kicked up to the northeast, but in this particular instance, we are seeing the trough dig down so far to the left that that is not the case here. Now we'll go down to the surface, and we can take a look at the wind profile, and we're going to look at the GFS as well. So we'll just go backwards just a little bit here. So we are now at 5, 6 o'clock this evening. The yellow area, the yellow that you see, those are sustained winds of gale force. And you get into the purples and the really reddish purples inside the core of the hurricane, and that's where you are talking about those winds 100 knots or higher. And you can see how where the hurricane force winds sustained are up both coasts, and the winds are actually also fairly impressive inland, even after it moves inland before it starts to weaken and then move even further north. So the whole state basically gets raked with this, either with the winds or certainly with the rains. And we'll show you the rain map, total rainfall being indicated by the NAM. And the rainfall amounts are going to be a foot plus, and we'll loop that along through time too. So now we're into early Monday morning. As the rain continues to accumulate, you can see those heavy rains in South Florida of a foot or more, and even 1 foot rains getting up into southeastern Georgia and northeastern Florida. But notice the rains up into the Appalachians as you go with the southern Appalachians up through North Georgia and into northwestern South Carolina. Much like the GFS has been indicating, there's some substantial rains of 2, 3, 4 inches there, but it's not crazy rain because the hurricane is, at this point, once it moves inland, it needs a little extra juice from something in the jet stream, and that's just it's just not there. There's no real there's no strong upper air trough that's coming into this to kind of re-energize it in a post-tropical way. I think that's probably the best way to put it. Here's the new GFS rainfall, and it's very similar to the NAM. So we'll now look at what the GFS has to say with regards to its surface movement, and I think we'll also use the 10-meter wind because we can already see that the rain is there on the radar, and we'll let it load. Now the GFS strengthens this back to a Category 5 hurricane. It comes off the north coast. This is at trying to read the time. So this is actually at 8 o'clock tonight that we see it coming off the north coast of Cuba, and then it is completely, the core is completely over the water by 1 in the morning, and by tomorrow morning moving very slowly over the Florida Keys. The GFS is very slow at this in terms of lifting it up. It still actually doesn't have the landfall coming in until tomorrow evening. It sort of swings it out a little bit just off the coast and then swings it back northeastward here for one period. So you're going to probably get these sort of wobbly motions in the track that causes this, and whether it's correct or not remains to be seen. But you see in the purplish area the sustained winds of 50 knots or higher. Certainly they're going to be gusts of hurricane force on both coasts, and sustained winds of hurricane force closer to the core. And here at this point on the model, which is a Monday evening, Sunday evening at 8 p.m., there's some very strong winds going on in the interior part of central Florida there, around Orlando, the whole middle part of the state getting rocked with some strong winds. And then, of course, the hurricane is going to gradually weaken as it moves northward, so the wind field begins to relax. It's into southwest Georgia by 11 a.m. Monday morning, and then into northwest Georgia, northern Alabama. So the same idea with that. And you can see, by the way, Jose is on the southeast corner of the picture between the Bahamas and Bermuda, and that's going to loop around for a few days. And believe it or not, this track of looping it back and turning it westward over time is not an impossibility. But we're not going to even worry about that now, because the short-range problem is obviously what's going on with Hurricane Irma. So let's go back real fast, and then I'll come and join you guys in conversation. So here's the latest. Let me refresh the Key West radar. And we'll do that. And you can see the bands there swinging back westward. There's some very heavy squalls out over the coastal waters there north of Key West. And we've got the Tampa Bay radar, which isn't showing too much other than some squalls that are off the east coast of Florida. And we'll have the Miami radar here. And let me just freshen that up for you. And there's the view from the Miami radar. The heavier bands are to the south of Miami at this point. It's going to get very crazy over in South Florida as the weather conditions continue to deteriorate slowly but surely. Here's the let me make sure that I got the latest, and I do. Good. So let's just give another view of Irma here as we follow the eye along. And very, the visible satellite picture it doesn't have that, obviously it doesn't have the look like it did when it was a Category 5, but the core of the hurricane is still pretty well defined here, and it's just riding those islands. It's just amazing to me because it was moving westward. You think it would have just kind of penetrated inland to some degree, but it really is just as if it kind of decided, and it started from here, from the far eastern part of the island, of these barrier islands, and is just taking that trip. The center just really is fighting the land and trying to stay over the coastal waters. And once it gets to that last barrier island, which it's going to do later this afternoon, it's going to be out over the open waters of the Florida Straits. So I'm going to now make myself visible here. Got a nice cool day here in my neck of the Northeast. Lots of sunshine. Got some few puffy cumulus clouds out there doing their thing, and temperatures are in the 60s. So it's really, really nice. So let's take a look at what's happening here. Tornado, you're here. I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to add you as a moderator. If you would, any trolls that show up, handle them. Okay? Thank you. Bryce T, what do I predict the Melbourne's wind will be? I think they're going to see wind gusts of hurricane force up and down the coast. I don't think that's outside of the that's really outside of what the models are showing. Christine, I'll add you as well. So we'll have two moderators here in the group. And thank you very much for that. So yeah, you're going to get gusts to hurricane force. I wouldn't at all, especially right along the immediate coast, right along the shore. Irma has been seriously fascinating, scary, but incredibly fascinating for an Atlantic tropical cyclone. Absolutely, Ray Pickles. This has been really quite an enjoying learning experience for me. Hi, Cynthia. Good morning. Glad you're here. This has been quite a learning experience for me. I try to learn something from all of these systems because they all have some sort of twist to them one way or another in terms of a forecast challenge. And this one has the twists in this hurricane have been very subtle ones. They haven't been, these sort of wide track deviations. The deviations have been so subtle, but those subtle deviations have had such huge impact on the Leeward Islands, especially when models had it going just to the north, and then the core of the hurricane winds up moving right over the islands. And this track now, when it went further west. By the way, my understanding is that communications with the Turks and Caicos remains cut off. So I haven't been able to see any of the damage that has occurred there, but I'm sure it's not pretty since the eye passed just south of them and over some of the offshore small islands that are just south of the main islands. And then yesterday, it went over the southern Bahamas. It went over an island called Ragged Island that lies about halfway from, say, from Grand Bahama to the coast of Cuba. And haven't seen anything from there yet either. And I wonder about the people in the northern leewards, which are getting grazed by Tropical Storm Jose. I'm just scrolling back to see what some of you have said. So, in case I missed any questions, the European on this one, Tornado, has been the one that's been furthest to the left all along. So that kind of gave us the clue here. You just adjust as you go along. It's been again quite a learning experience, and of course, the GFS has been okay, and it also was very good with the much better with the intensity than the European was. So at least so far. Stephanie R, what kind of devastation? You're inland, so that's really hard to say. That is so localized, and there's the threat that there will be severe weather and tornadoes with this. So you have to look for that possibility. I think you're going to have some strong winds there for a number of hours. They may not be the kind of winds that they'll see near the coast, but you could certainly get hurricane force gusts during all of this. Cynthia, I'm sorry, I don't remember if I said hi to you, but if I didn't, I'll say hi again. Let me see. I'm sorry, just having a little trouble scrolling here, trying to get to everybody. Do I think the news station sensationalizes too much and costs Florida unnecessary economic damage? Here's how I stand on this. Okay, this was a Category 5 hurricane. I think the evacuations were totally justified based on the information and the data that was there as the hurricane approached. You know, there's always going to be the risk that it doesn't turn out exactly the way the forecast turns out. And by the way, we still haven't seen what's going to happen yet. So maybe we should save that question for afterward. Right now, the correct course, in my opinion, and the opinions of the experts in this, was to evacuate. And you know, I have to tell you, I'm somebody that, given the choice, and I'm only speaking for myself here, I'm the type of person that, given the choice between leaving and staying, I would rather stay. I can understand that. It's your home. People always want to go home. It's very, very hard to leave that behind. It's like you're leaving the potential of leaving part of your life behind. So I can understand the emotional feelings of wanting to not leave. Also, there's the sense that, you know, if I stay, I can protect what I have. I get that. But at the end of the day, everything is fixable except your life. And I have to say that, you know, if I were down in South Florida on either coast, seeing what was coming, I would certainly have opted to leave on either coast, be it the East Coast or the West Coast. If it winds up that in the East it was manageable, okay. But, you know, you're also going to be looking at what's going on the West Coast of Florida. Somebody is going to see, you know, sustain damage from this. And, you know, you're never going to be, if you want to get the evacuations done in an orderly fashion, you can't do it in 48 hours when your forecast confidence is high. You have to do it ahead of time. It's an inconvenience. It is, you know, not an easy thing to do, but I think it was, I honestly believe it was, and whatever the outcome, given that what we were facing at the time, completely justified. Okay. And yes, Tornado, correct. The European seemed to become more accurate with the track when it got to inside 72 hours with its more west view. And, you know, as I've been saying all along, I've been thinking in terms of how to handling this from a forecast standpoint. The European was the western part of the track, the furthest west track, so that would be one end of it, and the GFS was on the eastern end of it, and all the others kind of fell somewhere in between. Now, you know what? We could still, as I said, right now I'm thinking I want to watch for the possibility that we might see a slight jog to the east in the next 24 hours because of the fact that the hurricane is a bit weaker, and it might respond to some lower level steering that will turn more southerly a little bit sooner. Just a thought in my mind and just a bit of a hunch. It may not happen at all. It may just follow the tracks that have been laid out by the models of, you know, up along or just inland of the West Coast. But we'll see. Eileen Rojo, what accounts for the difference in these models from a technical standpoint? Some of these, you know, they all have a certain amount of data in common, but, you know, some are written differently in terms of how the mathematical equations are set up. So you wind up with slightly different outcomes. The NAM model, for example, or the North American model, has, you know, doesn't have a lot of data outside of its scope of coverage, because the NAM, you can't look at the NAM to see what's going on in Europe or in Asia or areas outside of North America. It doesn't even really go that far south into down into the Caribbean. So the scope is different. The global models are global. They have all the data put into them from all over the place. And, it's just sort of like the butterfly effect where, butterfly flaps its wings on the other side of the world and it creates an outcome thousands of miles away. So, the global models tend to be better most of the time. Sometimes where the NAM does better is when when we have these, in the wintertime, sometimes the NAM can hit home runs with certain events because the system might be just kind of inside its scope and not really inside the scope of the others. Also, think of a grid, a data grid, just a basic grid, and at each point of the grid, there's data that is accounted for that particular point. And some models have grids that are spaced out larger than others, and they have less data. Some grids are very tight, and they have more data. So theoretically, the more data you have in it, the more accurate the outcome should be. But a lot of times I wonder if that is indeed the case. What kind of wind speeds does it take to blow off a roof? Well, I know with mine, and I have the shingles that cover on my roof, they're supposedly they're guaranteed to withstand 160 miles an hour. But you know what? I don't know. I don't want that tested. It depends on how well your house built, and it depends on the local codes where you live. But again, I would not want that tested. I don't know if you can see, by the way. It might be because of the camera angles of the turn. Let's see if he shows up. And he's not showing. He may show up here. I forgot I'm on a delay. Is he? Hang on one second. Yep, there he is. You see him? He was there. He came into view. He always likes to make appearances when I'm doing videos. He's so sweet, my cat. Fred, I don't think it's going to make that turn. The upper air, all the upper air suggests that it's going to make that turn, and it's going to do it in the next 6 to 8 hours, so we're going to know. If it makes it a little sooner, you're going to want to favor the southern end of the envelope in terms of where a landfall might be. If it makes it a little bit later, then you might want to shift it a little bit north along the Florida coast, but it is going to make the turn. I can't see the trough that's coming down is just way too deep. Hosea, will Irma be worse than Harvey, Wilma, and Andrew? You know what, Hosea, I think that's kind of a question that we're going to save for after. Let's see. I have no idea how this is going to turn out in terms of the damage end of it. Harvey's damage is because of all that heavy rain. That will, while there will be heavy rain issues with this, Harvey was a special situation with regards to how it's set up. This sets up differently. But and Andrew was very, relatively small in terms of its geographic scope when it went into southeast Florida. Irma has a much wider geographic coverage area, so each one of them is different, and each one is going to have a bit of a different outcome. Ray Pickles, this won't be an Ike situation where it couldn't re-intensify. It will. I happen to think it will. It certainly will have the opportunity to re-strengthen. I'm assuming based on what I'm seeing that the upper air conditions, remain very favorable for that. Nothing has really changed, and nothing should change in terms of the outflow. And the water temperatures are up close to 90. It might strengthen. And hurricanes sometimes, when in situations like this, once they get back out over open waters, they at least make an attempt to go back to the way they were. That's happened a number of times, and I suspect the way Irma has behaved in terms of its structure, and as it moved across the southern Bahamas and through the Leeward Islands in the southern Bahamas, that it might make one last burst of strengthening before landfall. Now, how fast it happens, if we can just do some some quick math. So let's say that it moves. Let's say the eye moves off the shore, off the coast of North Cuba by 8 o'clock tonight. Okay, and it might be very close to that. And the core of the hurricane is far enough offshore that we could start to see at least the weakening stops, and then it starts to strengthen. And let's also say that landfall is right according to the GFS, where it's a little slower and doesn't happen until, say, sometime early tomorrow afternoon. So that's going to give it 18 hours. If it strengthens rapidly, and a rapid rate would be 2 millibars an hour, okay? Sometimes maybe even a little faster than that. But let's just say 2 millibars an hour. And we're going to start with a pressure in the 940s. So let's do 950, just to be conservative. So it starts at 950. 18 hours times 2 is 36 millibars. 36 from 950 is 916. So that would suggest that if it would have to get to a rapid strengthening mode to get back down to its peak intensity. It has a shot to do that. It might be a bit of a push, but it has a shot to do that. So we're going to watch for that possibility. Maybe it will do something in between, which would make it a very strong Category 4 on landfall, which is going to be very imposing, to say the least. Crystal Games, what do I think about Jose? Jose is going to be in an upper airflow of no man's land when it gets out between the Bahamas and Bermuda, and it's going to be out there for several days. So I think right now I'm very Irma focused, so I really didn't give it a good look, but I will say this. You will, over the next several days or longer, see some very from time to time, you're going to see some very squirrely, what I would call squirrely runs from the long-range models, particularly the GFS, where they may suggest all kinds of solutions back to the coast, westward or southwestward, or maybe northwestward up into New England, or northeastward up into the Maritimes. I think you're going to see the models do that. Whether those models are correct in pointing that out is another matter. I would just say that at least what we do know in the next 5 days is that Jose will come to do some sort of loop or stall somewhere in between Bermuda and the Bahamas, and then we'll evaluate from there. What it does. And yes, Cynthia, I'm not surprised that it did that. I didn't look out far enough since I've been on the screen here, but you know, I'll punch it up separately, and I'm sure it did something squirrely with regards to Jose. I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's going to do it. You're going to see it happen a number of times, and you're going to see some model runs that are going to just kick it out to the northeast. So don't be surprised with whatever you see, and nothing of whatever you see is valuable as a forecast indicator at this point. It does point out, however, the high degree of uncertainty that we're going to probably deal with when it comes to Jose. So I'm just looking at it now, by the way, and it's out to day 12. So you can see that the GFS makes that loop, brings it just northeast of the Bahamas, just east of North Carolina. Oh, geez, you know, really? All right, so let's start that. You know what? We did this with Irma, if you remember. So why don't we keep track of this? This ought to be fun. So with respect to Jose on the longer range models, we've had it taking it a couple of runs into the Gulf of Maine. So now the track takes it to New York Harbor. So by the same token with what happened with Irma, where we went, by the way, and this is a good point here to make. The long-range models with Irma, if you remember, started with landfalls in Nova Scotia, the Gulf of Maine, southeastern New England, New York City, Chesapeake Bay, Wilmington, North Carolina, south. let's see if the subsequent model runs as we go forward start the same thing. So we've seen Portland, Maine, New York City. If you want to predict anything, I'll say the next run will have Jose, Delaware Bay or Chesapeake Bay. Let's see. I'll be very, very curious. I don't even want to look at the Canadian. God knows what the Canadian will do. It'll probably have multiple loops and multiple landfalls in multiple places. Even my cat agrees. He's just a little boy. He is. He's amazing. He loves being on camera, and he is actually, as I may have said before, he is like a dog. He, as a kitten, he was abandoned by his mother and had a bit of a wild streak in him. But we brought him in here, and he grew up with my dog. So he basically behaves in a lot of ways like my dog does. And he loves attention, runs to the door when people come, greets people as they come in, goes up to them to be stroked and petted. And he's very, most cats are, much more shy and secretive. He's a different sort of cat. All right, folks. So, you know what? I'm going to just really fast. We'll go back to Irma on the satellite loop, and let's take a look to see if that's updated. And we'll take a look and see how the eye's doing. Looks, to me, it looks like more of the center is out. There definitely it is not inland on the mainland. It's still straddling those barrier islands, and I'll give it a refresh. So look for the center to start to clear the coastline sometime very late this afternoon or early evening, and then let's see if it when that hook northward begins, because it should begin during this evening and start to take aim for the Florida Keys. So we'll just see how this all plays, folks. Now here's what I'm thinking. Probably going to do. I'll probably do another stream later this evening, and I'll see how the timing is. If it starts to look like a landfall on the mainland tomorrow, later morning or afternoon, I'll definitely going to live stream tomorrow morning, whatever time it is, when we're getting very close to when we get very, very close to the landfall time. Chris, you want me to nobody, well, I won't say your whole name. You want to see the radar? I'll put that up. So we'll go to the Key West radar, because that has the core in range. The Key West radar will be a very, very good radar to use here, folks, because we'll be able to actually follow the eye as it moves off. And you can see on the latest image, more of the core now is being exposed on this radar view. The geographic picture of what's actually here is probably not very accurate, not showing some of the barrier islands at this point because they're kind of small, but they are there. And we'll follow the Key West radar, and we'll get a really good idea here of how, if strengthening were to resume. So we'll end it here, and I'm going to get myself a little bit of lunch. I didn't go and do any fishing this morning, but I might try to do some this afternoon. All right, folks. So look, we'll be back here a little bit later today. I'll try and put a scheduled time up when I have a good idea of when I'm going to do the next live stream. And I will also be live streaming on Facebook in about a half an hour. So I'll update it on that side. So thank you very much, everybody. All you usual regulars, you're all wonderful. And thank you all for the very kind words. And those of you who have hit the super chat from time to time, I also very much appreciate that greatly. I had a double espresso on you this morning. So thank you very, very much. And we will see you a bit later on.